This one? Okay, this one's good too. Hi, and welcome. My name is Robert Pitt. I chair the Heritage and Archives Committee here at Gower Street United Church. And I wanted to welcome you on behalf of our committee. And I'm going to introduce our Chief Minister here at Gower, Reverend Pamela, as we call her, Fitzgerald. And she'll extend her greetings on behalf of Gower, which was one, of course, of the four churches of the Ecclesiastical District, National Historic Site of Canada. And I'll come back to say a few more words in a moment, but just to let people know, there are exits in case there is a need to exit at the back and out the sides and down the stairs here as well. But at floor level, right out the back on either, directly out the back on either side. There are washrooms. There's one right here through that door, and there are more when you go out the back down to your left, a hallway or so. If you have cell phones, just a reminder to put them on mute, if you don't mind, for the duration. And I'll come back to say a couple of other words after Reverend Pamela.
Good evening, everyone. Instead of Happy Easter, I'll say Merry Christmas. Oh my. I thought spring had sprung, but I think we've gone back 2 or 3 months. On behalf of the congregation of Gower Street United Church, want to say welcome to our beautiful sanctuary if you haven't been here before. It is a beautiful space with lots of history, lots of saints, vibes from all the saints that have gone by who've lived and breathed and worked and done ministry in this space and outside of our doors in the community. So welcome. Hope you enjoy the presentation. Thank you to Megan for being here again and for coming down the hill, I'll say, this time to Gower. Just want to acknowledge as well, because we are in the Ecclesiastical National District, the death of the Pope today. So acknowledge that or yesterday. And perhaps we could just take a moment of silence to recognize that in this space. Amen. And welcome again.
Thank you. Now I'm going to introduce the introducer in a moment. we like to do that, but I want to acknowledge some other members of the working group, the Ecclesiastical District Working Group, who are here tonight. And that's Reverend Derek Bishop and Janet Hewson from the Anglican Cathedral, which is down here. I recommend you visit it if you haven't already. Dr. Ann Walsh from the Basilica up that way, and Heather McClellan from the Kirk. And there are other members of our Ecclesiastical District, Ecumenical Ecclesiastical District Working Group here tonight as well. And again, welcome to Gower. Just a note, there's a brochure you should pick up on the way out on the history of this church. The congregation goes back to 1815. Since 1816 on this site, burned out twice, outgrew once. And so this is actually the fourth church that you're sitting in now for this congregation, the third on this site. So this church was consecrated in 1896 because the third Gower had been burned out in the fire of 1892. These windows you'll hear a little bit about tonight, and some of the earlier windows here in this church, as well as the stained glass windows of the other churches in the district when Megan speaks. There's also, if you're interested in stained glass, which I assume you are since you're here, we've got a little bit of a stained glass window market will be in the vestibule in the foyer afterwards. Several of the churches have reproductions of their notable stained glass windows, which are available for sale. And there are some cards and calendar and a few other things. So stay around for some tea and coffee afterwards, please, and have a little shop through the market out there. There's also a donation box, Goodwill donation box. We won't do a collection around tonight, but if you feel moved at the end, there is a donation box near the door on the way out too. Anyway, please enjoy the presentation and stay, as I say, for some tea, coffee, and nibbles afterwards. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the introducer of Megan, Dr. John Fitzgerald, a noted Newfoundland and Labrador historian, and also a member of our Ecclesiastical District Working Group. There will be a chance for questions and answers afterwards too. So if you could hold them to the end of Megan's discussion. She'll also be around having some tea or coffee afterwards, and you can chat with her then. But also we'll have a question and answer period after this. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Megan Donoghue-Stanford is a most welcome friend to us here, and certainly no stranger to the churches of the Ecclesiastical District National Historic Site of Canada here in St. John's. Megan obtained her Bachelor of Fine Arts in Visual Arts, a Master of Arts in History, in Art History, and a Curatorial Diploma from York University, Toronto, as well as a Certificate of Completion in Provenance Research from the University of Denver. She is a PhD candidate in Art History and Visual Culture at York University in Toronto, all of which is to say she is exceptionally qualified to speak on her subject here this evening. Her dissertation, her doctoral dissertation, examines the windows of the St. John's Ecclesiastical District National Historic Site of Canada as objects of art and of culture, and items which reflect cultural and denominational identity. Her work aims to situate the windows of these churches in our district in a historical context. For several years now, Megan has been very actively involved in the heritage efforts of this community to preserve Newfoundland and Labrador's stained glass windows. She has delivered conference papers and public talks about the stained glass windows of this district, and she is in the course of conducting research broadly about the stained glass windows of Newfoundland and Labrador. Not only has that research been done here in our district and elsewhere in Canada, but she has extensively conducted research on the windows of this district and on stained glass generally at churches and in collections in Europe. We are very pleased to welcome her back to this National Historic District of Canada to share her research, so please join me in welcoming Megan Donoghue-Stanford. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here at Gower Street United Church to talk about the stained glass windows of the Ecclesiastical District National Historic Site of Canada. So this is my first time presenting this chapter in its entirety, though a shorter version was done at the conference, the UAAC conference in October, but that was before I completed the chapter. So you're the first to get to hear the completed version of this chapter. So it's very exciting. The Ecclesiastical District National Historic Site in St. John's, pictured here from above Signal Hill, contains the principal churches of the four denominations that influenced the cultural and political climate of the city in the mid-19th and early 20th centuries. At number 1, we have the Basilica Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. At 2, we have St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church. At 3, we have Gower Street United. Behind number 4, the Anglican Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. This paper demonstrates how these four churches and their stained glass windows served as identity-forging tools for their different congregations in Newfoundland before its confederation with Canada in 1949. Each church selected important popular European stained glass firms to design their windows. These firms included William Warrington, C.E. Kemp, Lavers Burrard and Westlake, James Ballantyne and Sons, and Charles Levesque and his eventual successor, Louis Leichenheld Koch. In addition to these carefully selected firms, the windows of the district incorporated iconography that reflected both denominational and national identity, including windows that feature patron saints, monarchs, and historical figures of England, Ireland, and Scotland. The exception was Gower Street United's non-iconographic decorative glass, which does not establish this type of direct national tie, but rather reflects the congregation's Methodist history. By choosing these particular non-Canadian stained glass establishments and carefully determining which subjects were to be visualized in each location, these Catholic, Anglican, Presbyterian, and Methodist churches used their stained glass windows as an internal reflection of their own denominational and national identities. An examination of these windows helps us to gain an understanding of Newfoundland and Canada's cultural past. We will begin with the Basilica Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. Bishop Michael Anthony Fleming managed the construction of the Roman Catholic Basilica Cathedral following the plans of architect Ole Jorgen Schmidt. Completed in 1855, the basilica's design made reference to its Catholic identity by looking to Rome for inspiration. The Irish identity of the cathedral's congregation is referenced in the choice of building material. Granite and limestone were imported from Ireland and used in combination with stone from local quarries. Windows dedicated to the hagiography of Irish saints were commissioned during every installation period at the basilica and were promoted by church leadership to express the cultural and national identity of the congregation. This is first seen during the tenure of Bishop John Thomas Mullock, who succeeded Fleming in 1850, with the installation of the St. Patrick and Queen of the Holy Rosary windows, which are located across from each other in the transepts. They are highlighted on this map as windows 11 and 21. The Queen of the Holy Rosary from 1859 by William Warrington features the Virgin and Child, a fitting subject given the donors of the window were the ladies of the Society for the Most Holy Rosary. In the medallion above Mary and the Christ Child are two carefully selected Irish saints, St. Aidan on the right and St. Munchin on the left. These two 6th and 7th century bishops founded the first Christian religious sites in the places they are now associated with in Ireland. St. Aidan established a monastic site in Ferns, County Wexford, and St. Munchin is credited with establishing the first church in Limerick and now serves as patron saint of that city. The St. Patrick window, also from 1859 and by Warrington, shows the 5th century apostle of Ireland in the center of the window. Complete with a shamrock, which according to legend he used to illustrate the Trinity, and a wire-strung Celtic harp, which is a long-accepted symbol of Ireland. St. Patrick is a symbol of Irish identity, particularly for Irish Roman Catholicism, for it was through his missionary work that Christianity spread through the island in the 5th century. In the medallion above is St. Otteran, who lived in the 6th century and was one of the 12 who joined St. Columba in exile on Iona. Centuries later, after his death, he was selected as one of the patron saints of the Diocese of Waterford and Lismore. These three saints, Munchin, Aidan, and Otteran, featured in the medallions above these two windows, represent the places in Ireland from which much of the St. John's immigrant Irish congregation came. In these windows, members of the Irish community could see not only the early history of their faith, but also the connection of their families to specific dioceses in Ireland. This is exemplified through the St. Patrick window's dedication to Piers Fian, who was born in the historical diocese of St. Otteran, Waterford. Similarly, Bishop Mullock, who oversaw the installation of these windows, was born in Limerick, which perhaps explains the presence of St. Munchin in the medallion of the Queen of the Holy Rosary. The 3 clerestory or upper-level windows created by Koch of the Levesque firm of Beauvais, France, are dedicated to Ireland's main patron saints and clearly proclaim the Irish heritage of the Basilica's congregation. Labeled on the map as windows 6, 7, and 8, they are part of a larger program for the clerestory stained glass assembled in the 1880s and 1890s by Archdeacon William Forrestal. The 3 saints, Patrick, Bridget, and Columba, appear in adjacent windows on the west side of the nave, acting like a miniature program within the much larger one. All 3 windows were installed in 1891. St. Patrick is popularly credited with bringing Christianity to Ireland in the 5th century, and according to a 12th century hagiography, also with ridding the island of snakes. In the window, the saint is portrayed in full bishop's regalia, dramatically commanding the threatening snakes at his feet to flee to the distant sea, a reference to his driving paganism out of Ireland. The second window features St. Bridget, holding a crozier which identifies her as an abbess. During her life in the 5th and 6th centuries, Bridget was founder and first abbess at Kildare, where she oversaw the first Christian community for women in Ireland. The white cow seen behind her in the window alludes to the legend that such an animal sustained her early in her life when she was enslaved. The final window of the 3 presents St. Columba, an Irish monk. Designated as one of the 12 apostles of Ireland, Columba was born in County Donegal in 521. He founded several Irish monasteries, and during his later exile from his homeland, he established the foundation on Iona, an island off the west coast of Scotland, where he converted the Pictish king to Christianity. He is the patron saint of the Irish diaspora, making him a fitting subject for a window in Newfoundland that serves the Irish diaspora here. By selecting these saints, the congregation of the Basilica is connected back to Ireland and even to the specific counties from which their community members came. The selection of the Warrington and Levesque firms is also particularly interesting. While Warrington's windows in the church reflect the taste of the early Gothic revival and Warrington's general popularity in the mid-19th century, Levesque's windows reflect the growing popularity of German stained glass firms and designs in both Europe and Canada. German stained glass from the 19th century sought inspiration from the Renaissance, resulting in a more pictorial and dramatic style. Looking at the slide, you can clearly see the difference between these 2 firms. This pictorial German style was particularly popular in Ireland, where the Munich-based firm Mayer & Co. received many commissions to create windows for both Catholic and Protestant churches. One such example of a Mayer & Co. window can be found at St. Eunan's Cathedral in Letterkenny, County Donegal. The St. Patrick window is one of many windows by Mayer & Co. found at St. Eunan's Cathedral. Mayer & Co.'s St. Patrick is similar to that of the Basilica, as St. Patrick is shown commanding the snakes to leave Ireland. He is surrounded by Celtic knotwork in place of the traditional architectural Gothic canopy that is used to frame the other figures at the Letterkenny Cathedral. And it's an indicator of the specifically Irish identity of St. Patrick, and in turn, the Catholic congregation in Letterkenny. The knotwork even references Irish medieval manuscripts, with the design at St. Patrick's feet similar to knotwork found in the Book of Durrow. The window is an example of the popular Munich style of stained glass, which is more pictorial than the windows of English Gothic revival practitioners such as William Warrington. Eventually, glaziers outside of Germany adopted this style, and the Levesque firm of Beauvais, France, was one of those firms. The selection of the Levesque firm to create windows for the Basilica Cathedral can be seen as a reflection of the style and taste in stained glass among Ireland's Roman Catholic churches. In addition to this, Archdeacon Forrestal's commissioning of a studio from predominantly Catholic France to complete the clerestory windows, rather than one from England or Scotland, strengthened the Basilica Cathedral's Roman Catholic connections. The Levesque studio was one of the most popular stained glass studios in the French Gothic revival, with windows found in Parisian Catholic churches such as Chapelle Saint-Joseph de Cluny. Together with imagery of the Irish patron saints, the Basilica's windows put on a powerful display of both denominational and national identity. Now let's have a look at the Anglican Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. The Anglican Cathedral was constructed between 1847 and 1905 using bluestone from Newfoundland and imported sandstone from Scotland. Celebrated revival architect Sir George Gilbert Scott designed the building in the style heavily favored by the established Church of England, the English Gothic revival style. And he made reference to prominent medieval English cathedrals in his design. Some of the smaller details included in Scott's design were lost in the Great Fire of 1892 that consumed much of St. John's. This resulted in the need for the reconstruction of the cathedral. As only one stained glass window survived the fire, new stained glass was installed throughout the building in the late 19th and early 20th century. In direct contrast to the Catholic Basilica, these new windows depicted saints connected to the establishment of Christianity in England. The Great East Window, highlighted here at number A7, used this historical subject matter to reaffirm the cathedral's cultural ties with England. The Great East Window of 1911 by C.E. Kemp is the only window in the cathedral that was not paid for by donors, but rather by general subscription from the congregation. The window has 5 openings, also known as lights, and depicts the tree of the church. Christ is shown in the top center light with angels, saints, and doctors of the church branching out from him, symbolizing Christ's call to his followers to spread the word of God. The tiered fashion of the window was commonly found in medieval stained glass. Christ is surrounded by St. Peter, St. Paul, and St. John the Baptist. Below Christ, angels carry a scroll which states, "Herein is my Father, glorified ye shall bear much fruit," from John 15, verse 8. Saints and doctors of the church then branch out from the center. These figures, all labeled, include St. Ignatius, St. Cyril, St. John Chrysostom, St. Athanasius, St. Augustine of Hippo, St. Augustine of Canterbury, St. Aidan, and St. Ambrose. Above in the tracery is the heavenly host, where angels bear 2 more scrolls which read, "Thou art the King of glory, O Christ, and thou art the everlasting Son of the Father." The window is rich in symbolism and meaning, and references John 15. In this chapter, Christ refers to himself as the vine or tree and his apostles and followers as branches. The tiered composition of the window, combined with the foliage motif of the background, is well suited to this verse. The inclusions of St. Peter, Paul, and John the Baptist, along with early theologians, ties the Anglican Church to the very foundations of Christianity. Another level of meaning can be found in this window. St. Augustine of Canterbury and St. Aidan played an important role in the spread of Christianity in England. St. Augustine, the first Archbishop of Canterbury, was sent by the Pope, St. Gregory the Great, to convert the southern Anglo-Saxons in 597. St. Aidan, an Irish monk, sought to convert the inhabitants of the northern English kingdom of Northumbria in the 7th century. He founded the monastery of Lindisfarne off the coast of Northumbria in 634 and became its first bishop. Together, these 2 saints represent the 6th and 7th century revitalization of Christianity after the Germanic migrations into England. They are an integral part of the history of Christianity in England and thus the history of the Anglican Church. These ties are further expanded on in the windows of the nave. After the Great Fire of 1892, Bishop Llewellyn Jones became responsible for selecting a new program for the nave windows, which had been destroyed. He drew on some of the imagery of the original plan, with a window dedicated to St. John the Baptist to be installed in the cathedral's baptistry. However, new subjects were established for the stained glass in the nave, with the north side featuring the evangelists and early Christian martyrs above scenes from the Gospels, and the south side pairing Old Testament prophets with saints associated with the Christian history of England. For Jones, an important aspect of the adornment of the cathedral was displaying its cultural ties to England. All 6 windows on the south side of the nave are double lancets that have 2 figures in each light, organized in a tiered fashion with martyrs and saints above, and Old Testament prophets and patriarchs below. The first 3 windows of the program were created by the C.E. Kemp Studio, And the program begins with the Moses and Noah and St. Anselm and St. Jerome window from 1909. The figures are completed in the fine detail expected of the Kemp firm, holding identifiable symbols, with Moses depicted with the Ten Commandments and Noah a dove and ark. Jerome was an early Christian convert and scholar who translated the Bible into Latin, and St. Anselm was appointed Archbishop of Canterbury in 1093 by the Normans. The next window features Abraham with Isaac and Joshua, paired with St. Aidan and St. Paulinus. This differs slightly in composition from the other windows of the nave, as Abraham is shown about to sacrifice his son Isaac in the lower left light, giving the window a total of 5 figures instead of 4. Joshua, Moses' successor, is featured across from the pair in the right light. In the upper half are 2 bishops noted for their roles in converting the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. St. Aidan, an Irish monk from the monastery of Iona, served as Bishop of Lindisfarne and was commissioned by the Christian Northumbrian king, St. Oswald, to promote Christianity among his subjects. St. Paulinus, pictured above Joshua, was leader of the second mission to England, ordered by Pope Gregory the Great in 604. He was the first Bishop of York and later first Bishop of Rochester. Isaiah and David, paired with St. Alban and St. Lawrence from 1933, are subjects of the last window by the Kemp firm, installed in the Anglican Cathedral before the firm's closure in 1934. King David is pictured with his harp, and wears a crown signifying his kingship, which was taken to prefigure Christ's kingship of heaven. Across from David is Isaiah, who foretold the coming of the Messiah. The 2 prophets, both of whom are connected to the prophecy of the Messiah, are paired with early Christian martyrs. St. Lawrence holds the grail he was chained to during his martyrdom in Rome in the 3rd century. St. Alban was executed by beheading in Rome and Britain sometime in the 3rd or 4th century and is considered England's proto-martyr. Following the closing of the Kemp studio, 2 new stained glass firms were selected to complete the program of the South Nave: James Powell and Sons of London and the McCausland firm of Toronto. Only one of these windows was installed before 1949. The St. Gregory and St. Jerome and St. Cecilia and St. Catherine window was installed in 1947, following World War II. The funds for the window were provided by the Cathedral Men's Bible Study class. The subject of this window differs from the rest of the program, making it difficult to determine if these figures were originally part of Jones's plan. Instead of Old Testament figures, St. Gregory the Great and St. Jerome, 2 fathers of the Western Church, are depicted in the lower half of the lancets. St. Jerome, featured in the left right, is a repeated figure, as he is found in the first window of the program as well. Here, his importance as doctor of the church is highlighted, as he is placed in the same position as the Old Testament prophets found in the other windows. This is likely to denote his theological contributions to the development of the church. St. Gregory the Great is known for sending St. Augustine of Canterbury and St. Paulinus along with their missionaries to England to convert the Anglo-Saxons. 2 virgin martyrs, St. Cecilia and St. Catherine, are featured with the respective symbols of their faith, with the respected symbols of their sainthood: musical instruments for St. Cecilia and an execution wheel, which was used for St. Catherine's torture during her martyrdom. By placing key figures from England's Christian history alongside Old Testament figures, church theologians, and early Christian martyrs, the windows of the south side of the nave demonstrate the equal importance of these biblical and early church figures and English saints within the Anglican Church. The history of Christianity in England was a common feature in stained glass in England's cathedrals and churches, and its adoption in the windows of the Anglican cathedrals in St. John's indicates the strong ties between the homeland and the Dominion. A strong example of an English window with this subject matter is found at St. Albans Cathedral. This window, found in the Lady Chapel of St. Albans, is a Kemp window which depicts St. Chad, St. Edmund, and St. Hugh of Lincoln above, and then in the medallions at the bottom of the window, St. Sexburga, St. Etheldreda, St. Ossith, and St. Hilda, all saints associated with the early medieval history of the church in England. In between each set of English saints is an elaborate nativity scene associating English identity and history with Christian history and scripture. By pairing these English historical figures with biblical narratives, England is linked to the continuous history of Christianity, notwithstanding the Anglican Church's separation from Rome during the Reformation. By adopting subject matter that parallels stained glass found in cathedrals in England, the windows of the Anglican Cathedral in St. John's create a sense of cohesion between England and Newfoundland, connecting the congregation to the homeland and reminding St. John's parishioners of the continuity between the Anglican and early Christian church. The Anglican Cathedral did not just reference historical saints and monarchs in their stained glass to establish its cultural ties with England. Kemp's Queen Victoria Memorial window, circled at A10, can be found in the cathedral sacristy and creates a connection to England in a different manner than the Great East Window and windows of the nave. The Queen Victoria Memorial window was created following the Queen's death in 1901 and installed in 1903. In the window, Queen Victoria is accompanied by important figures associated with the history of Christianity in England. The most noteworthy is Alfred the Great, pictured across from Victoria. Alfred became first king of all Anglo-Saxons in 886 and kept the Kingdom of Wessex from falling to Viking invaders. He is also known for his promotion of education and the church. Above them, St. Augustine of Canterbury is shown with Pope Gregory, who ordered him to missionize England in the late 6th century. Augustine converted King Ethelbert of Kent, who is coupled with St. George in the upper right light. St. George was an early Christian Greek martyr who by the 14th century had been declared patron saint of England and protector of the royal family. As with the architecture, the Queen Victoria Memorial window creates a tie to England and its history. While the window features similar saints and figures to those found in the nave windows, it is the first to picture a contemporary monarch, Victoria. Picturing Victoria and Alfred across from one another, dressed in similar regal attire, with both paying homage to the enthroned Christ, represents the continuity of the English monarchy and its connection to Christianity. This iconography and tiered composition of the window recalls the political doctrine of the divine right of kings, presenting Victoria's rule as God's will, where she serves not only as empress, but as defender of the faith for all English Anglican settlers of Newfoundland and all other places in the British Empire. The dedication of the window demonstrates the belief in this divine right, as it reads, "To the glory of God, and in loving memory of Victoria. By the grace of God, Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, and all British dominions beyond the seas. Defender of the faith, Empress of India, 1837 to 1901. The window is not just a connection to the heritage of the Anglican cathedral's early 20th century English settlers, but a reminder that they were part of England's empire, its culture, and its official church, with the monarch serving as a divinely ordained head of both empire and church. The inscription on the window ends with the statement, "This window was dedicated by an Englishwoman," implying that the ties invoked by the window had been taken to heart by the congregation during this period. The stained glass of the Anglican Cathedral, embedded in its English Gothic Revival architecture, creates a tie back to England and its history. The architecture creates a visual tie to cathedrals in the homeland through its use of medieval authority, and the windows serve as an educational tool, explicitly detailing the English Christian history that the St. John's congregation is tied to. These ties are further cemented by Kemp's style of stained glass, which took inspiration from the late medieval or Northern Renaissance stained glass found at St. Mary's, Fairford, Gloucestershire. At Fairford, Kemp was inspired by the early 16th century work of Flemish glazier Bernard Flower that survived the destruction of stained glass that occurred in England during the Reformation. Though inspired by the 16th century Netherlandish style, Kemp's work specifically specifically inspired by the glass found at Fairford, draws upon a late medieval English church as its source of inspiration. The Anglican Cathedral's selection of the Kemp studio is directly connected to their Anglican faith. Kemp's firm almost exclusively took commissions from Anglican churches, and their work is popular in Anglican churches found in England, including St. Albans Cathedral and Gloucester Cathedral. It's time to turn our attention to St. Andrew's the Kirk and its relationship to St. Giles, the High Kirk of Edinburgh. The architectural firm of Wills, Pearson and Green was commissioned to build St. Andrew's Church to serve the Presbyterian Scottish community of St. John's. The church, rebuilt after the Great Fire and completed in 1896, was constructed in the Gothic Revival style. Accrington brick was one of the building materials used at St. Andrew's, but the Kirk also imported Giffnock stone from Scotland to construct their church, creating a direct link between St. Andrew's and Scotland. Reference to the congregation's denomination is displayed in the burning bush medallion, a symbol of the Presbyterian Church, the National Church of Scotland, and is incorporated into the high tower of the Kirk. Not only is this medallion symbolic of the faith of the congregation, but also of their history, for it was what remained of the previous building that was destroyed in the Great Fire of 1892. Unlike the Anglican Cathedral and the Basilica, there are no windows from this period that feature Scotland's patron saints and historic figures at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church. Instead, the Kirk's representation of national identity was developed in the selection of its main iconographic program, which is modeled after the first post-Reformation stained glass windows to be installed at St. Giles, Edinburgh. St. Giles Cathedral, also referred to as the High Kirk of Edinburgh, sits beneath Edinburgh Castle. A site of worship since 1124, the current building was constructed in the 14th and 15th centuries. St. Giles is a historically important church to the Presbyterian faith. John Knox, the leader of the Scottish Reformation, delivered sermons at St. Giles, and it became the main church of the movement by 1560. Knox, a disciple of John Calvin, opposed religious imagery, believing it to be idolatry. Subsequently, St. Giles was purged of all imagery, including its medieval stained glass. It was not until the restoration of St. Giles, promoted by William Chambers, the Lord Provost of Edinburgh, in 1863, that stained glass was reintroduced. The restoration was carried out by William Hay, who was G.G. Scott's Clerk of Works. Following the Reformation, there were no Scottish stained glass firms until 1837, when Ballantyne and Allen opened in Edinburgh. Ballantyne's success initially came from commissions outside of churches in Scotland, including the House of Lords in 1843. Restoration work at St. Giles began in 1872, and Ballantyne's firm was chosen by Chambers and a committee appointed by city and ecclesiastical commissioners to provide the stained glass windows. There is absolutely no architectural similarity between St. Giles in Edinburgh and St. Andrew's and St. John's, but the links between the two stained glass programs is significant. The committee at St. Giles selected Life of Christ as the program for its east end. The windows were installed between 1874 and 1877. St. Andrew's and St. John's selected the same program, with its first window installed in 1902 and the final window installed in 1926. The selection of the Life of Christ as the subject and the commissioning of the Ballantyne firm to complete the windows created a deliberate link between the two churches. The St. Giles windows are large, allowing for multiple subjects and events from the Gospels to exist within one window. St. Andrew selected particular scenes from these larger windows as inspiration for their smaller, two-light windows. The first window in the Life of Christ program at St. Giles combines the Nativity, Simeon encountering Christ at the temple, the flight to Egypt, and the disputation with the doctors. The Nativity, which includes the visit of the wise men, occupies the upper half of the window across the three lights, becoming the most important of the four subjects of the window. This subject became the focus of the Nativity window, also entitled The Visit of the Wise Men at St. Andrew's. Though the Nativity is emphasized, the St. Giles window tells the narrative of Christ's childhood. Due to the expansive range covered in this window, St. Andrews drew on a second subject, the disputation with the doctors, which is referenced in a second window at St. Andrews, entitled Jesus the Scholar from 1926. Though St. Andrews did not have the window size or space to depict all of Christ's childhood, they chose to emphasize the start and end of the narrative that was found in the first Life of Christ window at St. Giles. The subjects of the next two windows at St. Giles, installed in 1875, are combined into one window at St. Andrews. The first window includes the baptism of our Lord, calling of the apostles, the first miracle at Cana, and the healing of the sick, while the second window features Christ blessing the little children, the stilling of the tempest, the healing of the blind, and the raising of Lazarus. The larger window at St. Giles provided the opportunity to illustrate specific events in Christ's public life, emphasizing his miracles, while the much smaller window at St. Andrews, entitled Jesus the Teacher, combines this into a single scene and shows Christ preaching to a crowd of people. Christ's entry into Jerusalem, the purging of the temple, preaching at the temple, and the widow's mite window from 1875 is the next window at St. Giles and shows the events of Palm Sunday. Christ's entry into Jerusalem is showcased in the top three lights, making it unsurprising that this is the subject that St. Andrews chose for their analogous window, Jesus entering Jerusalem. Though the subject matter is the same, the window at St. Andrews is far less complex, with the crowd depicted with matte paint on white glass, where the crowd at St. Giles is depicted in full color. The Last Supper, Agony in the Garden, the Betrayal, and Christ Bearing the Cross from 1875 is located next to the Great East Window at St. Giles. This window's theme focuses on the events of Holy Thursday and Good Friday, with the Last Supper being the primary subject of the window. St. Andrew's program chose not to depict the primary subject, likely due to the size and shape of its own window, with the two-light window allotted to this time in Christ's life being ill-suited for the large horizontal composition that the Last Supper requires. Instead, emphasis is placed on Christ's suffering through two subjects drawn from the lower half of the St. Giles window, the Agony in the Garden and Christ Bearing the Cross from 1825. The Great East Window of St. Giles' Life of Christ program is larger and differs in composition from the other windows in the series. Installed in 1877, it gives equal attention to its two primary subjects, the crucifixion and the ascension of Christ. The crucifixion is spread across the 5 lower lights, with the ascension featured above. Christ is in the center of both the crucifixion and the ascension, and unlike the other figures in this window, he is not framed by a canopy. The crucifixion from 1925 at St. Andrews frames Christ in the center of the 3 lights in a similar manner to the St. Giles window. St. Giles presents a far more detailed crowd for the crucifixion, with several apostles and Roman soldiers. This window is reduced to a few key figures at St. Andrews, including a weeping Mary comforted by St. John, 3 holy women, and 2 Roman soldiers. This reduction is once again a product of the smaller space available at St. Andrews. The second subject of the Great East Window at St. Giles is the Ascension, and it does not have a corresponding window at the St. John's Church, where instead they opted for a Christ in Glory window, installed in 1902, which depicts Christ on his heavenly throne following the Ascension. The final window in the Life of Christ series at St. Giles presents angels appearing to the women at the Holy Sepulchre, Jesus appearing to Mary Magdalene, Christ appearing to St. Thomas and Christ appearing to the disciples. The events depicted in this window are combined into a single scene in the Kirk's Resurrection window from 1908, where an angel shares news of the resurrection with the holy women and the apostles. Christ is featured above, appearing as if he's already ascended. Though St. Andrews selected the Ballantine firm and the same program as St. Giles in Edinburgh, the styles of the windows could not be more different. The window at St. Andrews that used a similar color scheme to the windows at St. Giles is the Christ in Glory window in the transepts. It was the first to be installed at St. Andrews in 1902, and thus the closest in date to the windows found at St. Giles, explaining the similar color palette. However, the painting style differed greatly between this early window in St. John's and the Life of Christ program at Edinburgh's High Kirk. This was due to the 25-year gap in production, which resulted in a different generation of artists working for the Ballantine firm when installation at the Kirk began. The other windows at St. Andrews show an even greater variation in style and especially color, making use of more jeweled tones, as seen in St. Andrew's crucifixion window. Stylistic differences aside, the tie between St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church and the High Kirk in Edinburgh created a deliberate linkage between the St. John's congregation and their Scottish Protestant heritage. We will now look at the pre-Confederation stained glass of Gower Street United Church. Gower Street United Church, originally Gower Street Methodist Church, was completed in 1896 following the loss of the previous building to the Great Fire. Like the Anglican Church, the Methodist Church had ties to England, having been founded in the 18th century in England by John Wesley. Though Wesley was originally a dedicated member of the Church of England, Methodism eventually became its own movement and distinct denomination. Gower's hammer beam roof takes authority from late medieval models, visually maintaining the church's ties to England. But the decision to build in the Romanesque revival style out of Accrington brick visually distinguished Gower from the neighboring Anglican cathedral. The new building was designed by Elijah Hoole, a well-established architect of Methodist chapels in England, who conducted the restoration of Wesley's Chapel in London, England. Selecting Hoole as an architect directly connected the Gower Street Methodist Church to the Methodist Church in England. As with the Kirk, Gower's oldest stained glass windows were installed following the construction of the current church after the Great Fire of 1892. Gower Street United is the only church whose windows dated before 1949 consist entirely of patterned glass, rather than pictorial scenes. Until 1925, when several Protestant denominations, including the Methodist churches of St. John's, unified to become the United Church of Canada, Gower Street Methodist Church was home to the oldest Methodist congregation in the city and had been serving the community since 1815. Though only a few examples of Gower's patterned windows survive, these early windows reflect the building's Methodist history. Patterned glass was likely exclusively used at Gower due to the reluctance among Methodist churches to accept stained glass during the early Gothic revival, as stained glass and other decor was believed to distract from Scripture. Due to this long-standing rejection of imagery, stained glass only gained traction in England's Methodist churches in the late 19th century and first began to be installed in the 1870s, over 3 decades since the start of the Gothic revival. Even following this acceptance, geometric windows were most often adopted. When pictorial windows were featured, they often focused on the gospel. During the 1891 restoration by Elijah Hoole and William Wilmer Pocock, it was during the 1891 restoration by Elijah Hoole and William Wilmer Pocock that stained glass was introduced to the mother church of World Methodism, Wesley's Chapel, City Road, London. Wesley's Chapel was originally designed in 1777 by architect George Dance the Younger on behalf of John Wesley. During the 1891 restoration, the firm Mayer & Co. of Munich was selected to design the windows of the chapel's apse, distinguishing the chapel's first windows from the English firms often commissioned for England's Anglican churches. The 2 windows pictured here are the Adoration of the Magi and Solomon's Porch. The windows of Wesley's Chapel were installed 3 years before the completion of the new building of Gower Street United and served as a model for the inclusion of pictorial windows in Methodist churches. However, Gower Street United chose not to follow this trend, instead opting for patterned glass, examples of which were also found at Wesley's Chapel. Gower retained this patterned glass installed during its construction until the 1950s. To the selection of the Romanesque Revival style for its architecture, these patterned windows were a way for Gower to differentiate itself from its neighbors in the district. What remains of this early glass can be found nestled in different areas of the church, above doorways, in halls, and in stairwells, offering a glimpse into what Gower looked like following its construction. Of the remaining large windows, one can be found in the staircase and the remaining 4 in the enquiry room, forming a bay overlooking Gower Street. These windows share the same design, alternating between a yellow and purple diamond pattern and a red and blue checkered pattern, with detailed outlining completed in dark red. Smaller windows, including a pair in the main staircase and a single lancet in the vestibule staircase, use these checkered and diamond patterns on a smaller scale. The remaining windows, which are found embedded in and above Gower's doors, also make use of this dark red to outline the geometric designs of the glass. The windows and the doors that have retained the original glass contain a triangular pattern within the red outline and are fitted into 3 rectangular openings. Above the doors, semicircular windows are found with a variety of geometric patterns. The largest of these is found above Gower's entrance from the Queen's Row. It contains 3 medallions. 2 have geometric patterns, similar to a flower, and a center medallion which consists of several smaller circles encasing a smaller geometric pattern of diamonds, squares, and triangles. Below, 2 more lights featuring a cross-hatched yellow and purple diamond design create a visual connection to the patterned windows found in the stairwell and enquiry room, leading to the assumption that this was a motif repeated throughout the building. Gower Street United's patterned windows draw on the tradition in Methodist churches of bringing in the colorful nature of stained glass into the church without making it a focal point. So, what can we conclude from this? The Basilica Cathedral, Anglican Cathedral, and the Kirk all selected iconography that reflected the Irish, English, and Scottish heritages of St. John's early immigrant population. Only Gower Street United remains an exception among the churches of the district, with no pictorial windows to reference the church's English patrimony. Methodism, unlike the Church of England, was not the official church of the English state, which may have caused the congregation to reflect their denominational identity in their stained glass rather than their national identity. Both the Basilica and Anglican Cathedral selected saints specifically associated with Ireland and England to connect their parishioners to their homeland. These 2 saints, Patrick and St. Augustine of Canterbury, were not just national symbols, but were linked to the establishment of Christianity in Ireland and England. At St. Andrews, the selection of the same firm and program as St. Giles Cathedral directly connected the Presbyterian community in St. John's to Scotland. In creating this bond, St. Andrews is also linking itself to the establishment and perpetuation of Presbyterianism in Scotland, in a similar manner to how the Basilica and Anglican Cathedral sought to tie themselves to early Christianity. The iconography found in these particular stained glass windows of the Ecclesiastical district not only served as a tool to remind each congregation of their homeland, but linked them to the history and continuity of their faiths. Stained glass windows do more than fill holes in the wall. They are a reflection of a society's identity and allegiances, and thus very important and a valuable aspect of Canada's social and cultural heritage. Thank you.
We're going to bring up the lights here for a moment, and thank you, Megan, and we'll have a more formal and official thank you in a moment too. But first, we're going to have an opportunity for some questions, if that's all right. Would anyone like to ask Megan a first question? Here.
I'm just wondering about the colors that are used in stained glass. Is there any difference in a color that would be more prominent than another, or that would be more richer or more symbolic within the stained glass?
It really, I guess, would depend on the type of window and who's depicted in the window. Because obviously the selection of color could be used to emphasize the position of a particular saint, perhaps their position as a bishop. For example, I believe it's the use of red can denote someone as an apostle. So it really depends on the window, who's being depicted, and then the color would add an additional layer of symbolism on top of that.
We have a microphone in there now if anyone wants.
Thank you, Megan, for a very interesting talk. I'm curious about the spirituality. Is there any obvious examples throughout your research that speak of people's being inspired to create a specific window? Is there any kind of grace attachment to? Is there any that would inspire people's devotion rather than just the intellect?
So I definitely think so. A lot of these stained glass artists were part of these larger firms, but this was their work, and it represents obvious devotion to their faith. I mean, if we look at Kemp, he almost joined the Anglican Church as part of the clergy, and ended up not joining, but dedicated his life to creating these windows for Anglican churches. So I think for the artists, it's an expression of their faith for sure. And then once installed in the churches, it's meant to educate the parishioners about their faith. The original purpose of stained glass was an educational tool for a medieval illiterate population. So they had these pictures to learn about the stories of saints, of the Bible, of the Old Testament. And it really aided in them learning about their own faith and thus becoming better practitioners of their faith. No problem.
Other questions?
One second, I'll come to you.
Thanks. This is a really basic question. I wondered if you could speak a little bit more about the selection process. If we were like a committee here in 1900 and thinking we would like to buy some stained glass, what would our selection process be? Would we be working from a catalog, or would it be more custom?
What would definitely very popular, and you could go through those catalogs and select particular designs. So in some of these churches, you'll actually see almost identical figures found in churches in England, Ireland, and Scotland. For example, Ian and Jane from the Kirk sent me a photo where the War Memorial at Cooper Angus in Scotland is identical to the one found here at the Kirk. And that's because those catalogs were widely available, and you'd go in and you'd select what you want, and you could make minor alterations based on what you wanted. But it was really, it made the artists' lives easier because they could go through, they had the cartoon drawn up, and you could change the colors, select the figures you wanted, and they could sort of mix and match. So you could have your own unique window, but it would also look really similar to someone else's window.
Megan, my interest is a question for you personally. How did you get interested in the windows of this district? Of all the places in the world that you could have picked for your dissertation, what drew you to these 4 churches?
So it's a bit of a layered process. My grandfather is from Great Cove, Newfoundland, so I have a family connection to Newfoundland. He passed in 2019, just as I was applying to do this dissertation, so there's that connection there. I also took several stained glass courses in my undergrad, where my current supervisor, Professor Shirley Ann Brown, who also runs the National Registry of Stained Glass in Canada, emphasized how under-researched Canadian stained glass in general is. And this project, started before COVID, was originally meant to be a documentation project that sort of looked at all the windows in Newfoundland and Labrador. And because of COVID, fieldwork wasn't possible for the first 3 years, so it really shrunk down to this district to make the project manageable. But I do work with a committee here in Newfoundland that's working to register all the windows here with that national registry.
Thank you, Megan. I really appreciated your presentation. I know that each window is a lot of work to select, to pay for, to install, to deliver. So each is sort of a work of passion. And some of the ones that you've highlighted were quite impressive. I wonder, were there any that stood out to you as really impressive or heroic, either in the amount of effort put into it or the amount of cost associated with it?
I do think the War Memorial window at the Kirk is particularly special. I know there's basically a very similar window in Scotland, but from what I've learned from Ian, who's here today, that James Ballantyne came over himself and helped install the window because he had a connection to one of the fallen members at the Kirk here in Newfoundland. And I think that part, that history of that window is special because the artist came himself, because of his personal connection here in St. John's.
Megan, I'm wondering at the Basilica if there is any reference to the Irish people's struggle with England. Is there anything represented that you are aware of?
I think John may be a better person to answer that question than me.
Well, maybe I'll hand that over to Anne. But before I do, I'm not sure. That's a good question because, I mean, the building was built at a time of when you had a lot of people supporting Daniel O'Connell, but they certainly couldn't be thought of as Republican or, you know. Anne, your thoughts on that?
I don't think so. That'd be a great thing to do more research on. But no, I don't think there is such a link to be made. No, it's really interesting. I've never thought of it before, but nothing is coming to mind. I will do some more research and we'll get back to you.
Any other questions? Oh, Reverend Derek.
Not a question, but a comment in reference to Peter's question earlier about spirituality. I have an interesting story of a little girl in Sunday school being asked, "Who are the saints?" And she was thinking of the stained glass window. She said, "They're the people the light shines through." So I thought that was charming, and to me that speaks of how it spiritually touched her. So.
Not about Daniel O'Connell. But what Derek said is interesting, Megan. As I took Megan on a tour of the Basilica yesterday, and if you want to think about being intimidated, it was intimidating. But one of the things to point out is that Megan hasn't focused on all of the windows, just some of them, and with regard to her particular themes. So some of the other windows I know in the Anglican Cathedral, in the Kirk, and also at the Basilica, and probably here, but certainly my area is the Basilica, there are lots of windows that do more specifically address the spirituality because they depict saints, and either the people who donated the window, the individual, or the group had a particular devotion to that saint, or some reason for picking that saint. For example, right next to the choir loft is Saint Cecilia, the patron saint of music. So I think it's important to realize that Megan is picking particular windows for this chapter, and other windows exist in the building that may speak more to the question Peter raised as well.
And hopefully I'll be talking about those windows in another presentation on my third chapter of my dissertation.
I was wondering if we could craft a story about the window in the cathedral that survived the fire of 1892. And like the one, I think, in Coventry Cathedral in England, where they picked up all the pieces of the rose window and put it back together, and it became more beautiful than it was originally. It's kind of, maybe we need to craft a story about the one remaining window that survived the fire.
Well, I definitely think you should, because it's the resurrection window and it survived the fire. I think that's symbolic in and of itself, right?
After this, tea, coffee, back, Megan will be there, and you can continue this informally. I should also make a plug for this church and the others. If you haven't already visited, sorry. I'll make a plug for the other churches and this church. If you haven't, after you've heard this talk tonight, if you haven't already visited the other three churches, the kirk, the basilica, and the cathedral, particularly in daylight when you can see the light coming through those people, you need to do that. Make a plan to visit and see these windows in the flesh, in the glass. But while you're here tonight, please feel free to have a look, even though, as Megan explained, these windows are all, the pictorial ones in Gower are all relatively new, from the late 50s on. They're still worth looking at. Better to come back in the day to see them. But my own favorite is right at the back on the third level up, which you can go upstairs on either side. This one was done by Sunhound, Newfoundland windows. It was put in by the Roberts family, the Honorable Edward Roberts, former Lieutenant Governor of the province, who died just a couple of years ago. He and his family put in this window in honor of his mother and father. And it's Newfoundland themed, and my own favorite window in Gower. So if you have the energy afterwards, you can climb the levels to see these. I should also mention that you're welcome to come back here. I think it's the 8th of June. Gower will be officially marking the launch of the 100th anniversary of the United Church of Canada. Will be here, and the moderator of the United Church of Canada will be here for that service. So come back in the day, see the windows. It'll also be the 210th anniversary this year of the Gower congregation. So please come back for that too. Now I'm going to call on Dr. Ann Walsh to give an official thank you to Megan.
Well, there's nothing better than an official thank you. So we do want to thank you, first of all, for coming, for your interest in this tonight. And thank you to Megan for putting this together and making such a coherent story for us of our 4 disparate churches that really respect and express 4 different cultural identities, people bringing from their old world places customs, iconography, ideas, images that they wove into a new story here. Megan has pointed out the differences between the European models and what was found here. So what they were trying to do was, yes, bring their identity from home and weave a new identity here. And those stained glass windows are a significant part of that. In addition, those 4 separate communities settled within such close geographic proximity that they became one in another way. They tell 4 stories, but also one story of 4 denominations coming together over time with many elements of a shared history. And Megan has begun to weave that story for us as well, to point out some of the differences, yes, but also some of the similarities. So as we grow in our identity as an ecclesiastical district, as one unified district, we thank Megan for her research that's helping us to celebrate our diversity and also see new inroads into our unity. So thank you for that. And we have a little gift bag that represents all 4 churches.
Okay, perfect.
So thank you.
Thank you.
So I thank you.
I'll come down. Oh, okay. I thought you wanted me to come down. No worries.
Suggest that you now retire to the vestibule and enjoy some if the coffee's too strong, I made it. There's hot water, and you can add, you can dilute it a little bit if you need to. And again, thank you for coming too from me and from Gower.